they don't job, and then you're playing with them, and they're not at a great point, they've come out of a relationship, they've lost their job, they've got a lot of stress going on for them. That reaction to exactly the same thing is going to differ. We're not robots. We talk about this all the time. We are human beings, and we are humans first. So it's about having that conversation prior to play. We can't predict what will happen. We can't predict when we will drop. Some people do have patterns there. Some people drop if they're premenstrual, for example. Some people will drop more when sort of activity, if it's this kind of play, if it's needles, so it's about learning how things work for you. It really is a very, very exciting voyage of discovery, particularly at the beginning, and it's about how you manage that. And if there is a way that you particularly find managers drop for you, you think this is helpful, I want communication on day 2, communication on day 4 works for me, write that down. I always encourage anybody when they're new to BDSM and they're new to play that they start journaling what they enjoyed, what they didn't enjoy, what works for them, what doesn't work for them. Keep a record of it. It's really, really important information.
This came up. I was having a conversation with someone the other month, and their pattern was that certain activities they drop really heavily after 3 days. So that is their point in time where they need all that comfort things, they need the reassurance, they need the support, and they hadn't thought that actually, if they play on a Saturday night, that's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So actually, realistically, so that it doesn't impact their normal life, they're better off playing on a Wednesday. Because actually, it's not going to interfere with their job, their studies, the other things in their life, just by shifting it a couple of days. Now, after a while, they will learn to deal with that and process it better. And it might be a case of, now we can have a cheeky play on a Tuesday night, knowing that Thursday might be a little bit fractious, but it's not going to be as bad as it was when you first started.
Yeah, and again, though, some people I think experience quite significant drop all the time. Some people differently fluctuate. And there's no right or wrong to this. It's about knowing who you are, what it looks like for you, what you need from another person, what you need from yourself, and to really take that accountability. If you are someone who drops and you drop heavy, and that can happen with certain sorts of play, there's a certain sort of play, if I engage in it, I will always drop heavy. It's about looking at, as we said, when am I going to play like that? I'm not going to play like that, before I've got a job interview the next day or I've got massive responsibilities. So I have to take accountability for when that fits into my life, And also for certain people, if they're on medications as well, that's really important. A lot of us might be on psychotropic medication, and by that I mean anything that affects us. So, antidepressants, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, even some beta blockers, things that we take for physical health, epilepsy. They have a huge impact on if we're going to drop, how we're going to drop, and how long we're going to drop for. Because what we're doing is we're messing with, noradrenaline, cortisol, we're messing with those hormones. So it's about understanding the impact of that. HRT could go in that category. That can have a huge impact in terms of drop. Is what good. So drop is, it's not reversed, it's something that we overcome and go through. So ultimately it's a process. So we will have this real high, we'll have this peak of all the good stuff that makes us feel fabulous on top of the world. Some people talk about subspace. Ultimately it's that space where we've got to a place where we're floating. And what that really is, it's very different to disassociation, but it's an extremity hormone that makes us feel really good.
Homeostasis. Is anyone not familiar with that term? Homeostasis. A few people will be nervous to put their hands up, but it is when your body maintains a stable and steady state. So you're walking along, you walk into the dungeon, you accidentally trip and fall over a spanking bench and someone is there spanking you straight away. So what happens is all of those hormones get produced. So you get a release of endorphins, you start to get floaty, you start to get drifty, you have that response. But then your body that normally produces a low level of endorphins suddenly goes, hang on a minute, I've produced this excess amount, I no longer need it, so it turns it off. And then the level as it metabolizes will come down and down and down and down. Now, in an ideal world, the perfect human body would go, I'm about to run out of that, and it would turn it on, the production, before you ran out. But that's not how it works. So you drop down below the level where you naturally have it in your body, and you have a deficit. And it's that deficit which is the impacting event.
And then what happens is, I think a lot of people start chasing, so they never reach that deficit. We find people who play a lot, they play regularly, perhaps they're professionals, or they have regular play partners, lots of people can play several times a week. And that can be a huge drop because you never get back to that status. So it's not about something that goes away, it's about something that you overcome. And for some people, the more you engage in something, the less of that experience that you have, become normalised to it. For some people, that never happens, and you always have that feeling. And again, that's what I mean about how this works for individuals. There is no one size that fits all. It's very, very different. And some people will ultimately not have job, and then they will have an experience of something they've never experienced before, and there's, oh my God, what is this? So it's about normalising as a process, understanding what's happening. Because it can be, if you've had an experience where you've been particularly vulnerable. I remember having a scene that involved captivity, it was quite an extended scene, and I had really, really bad drop when I for a week. And it was like, what on earth is going on? And that, going back many years, is probably the first time that I properly researched what physiologically and psychologically is happening to them. And I think once you understand, as you said, what is going on for you, it takes that out, it takes the mystery out, and then you look, okay, this is what's happening, what do I need? What do I need? And it's about communicating that, because if you are somebody who ultimately you can say, well, I really, really want to do, somebody approached me earlier on today and said, I want to know about legal play, I want to know about sharps and medical play, will you spend some time talking to me later on? Of course I will, absolutely. Now, if, for example, I love doing medical play, talking to medical play, if that person, for example, says, well, when I do this sort of, when I do needles, I drop really, really heavily. If you're looking at compatibility of people to put together in terms of, well, you like doing needles and you like receiving needles, that is great. But if you drop really heavily from needle play and you want to play and use myself as an example, then I've got 2 jobs, 2 whippets, one of those tiny baby, 2 children at home. You need a lot from me afterwards. It might look like we're a really, really good fit, but I'm looking for somebody that I can casually play with and not have to invest a lot into in terms of a relationship. I'm not in a position to do that. So things can look like they go together really, really well on a surface level when you're not looking at things like this, but the reality is, how are we matched? And what you require from somebody after a scene is as big of a question to be asking as, do you do the thing that I enjoy? How are you available to me afterwards? What does that look like?
In fact, I'm going to go one stage further and reinforce that point by saying you can develop the skills, but if you don't give the support that both parties require, then the relationship is never going to go anywhere. In fact, it's going to become more and more and more toxic because you're not actually aligned in terms of the aftercare activities. So realistically, it's probably the first thing that you should talk to people about, because you're going to go off on that journey and you want to make sure that, in this case, the person that you may need support from is capable of giving that. And equally, don't feel frightened if you have some quite extensive aftercare needs and requirements. If you disclose them, the person will say legitimately, sorry, I can't do that at the moment, but actually with a bit of time I might be able to schedule it into the diary so that I can have that play, and then I have an easier time in my diary a week after. So if someone wanted to play with me, let's say Thursday, and they would drop 3 days later on the Sunday, I'm not going to play with them on an event weekend because I'm busy dealing with all of you, and I can't kind of stop everything and go, no, it's okay. I didn't really mean you're a filthy, dirty, fucked up bit of a slut. That was just the way we were playing. But 3 days later, that phrase may have caught up, and suddenly that person is transfixed in what was said. They've got themselves caught in a loop. They need someone just to pull them out and say, no, remember, we discussed that before, it's all cool. But if I'm not the person who can answer the phone on that Sunday, then all of a sudden, oh my God, that horrible, mean cosmic is such an abuser. But in fact, it's like, sorry, I'm doing this, and I can't do that at the same time. So I will turn things down if there is a clash on that level, or arrange it so it works.
Oh, so someone else can provide what's needed as well. Ultimately, you know, we don't necessarily always have to get, you don't always have to get that support from the person that you play with. You know, we can get it externally. And I suppose that example that Cosmo's giving there is really a little bit further down the line as well. Even that example, you know, what you're saying there is quite advanced, just depending on somebody knowing that when I will drop, I'll probably drop 3 days after the scene. It will probably look like this, and I'll probably want external support. For a lot of people who haven't done a lot of play, you know, it might take 6 to 8 months before you've got that information available to you. You know, some people here will not drop. You know, you won't recognise it as drop. There will be something that goes on to you that is still going to happen, but you won't necessarily feel it. You know, in the same way that people can get to, you know, 20 weeks pregnant and not realise that they're pregnant. That seems absolutely crazy to me. I was so ill in early pregnancy. I'm like, oh my god. But we all experience life differently. So for some people that won't be an issue. For some people it will take a lot of information gathering for them to realise, well, this is what my drop is. This is a pattern to my drop. So it's about ultimately starting slow, you know, doing things that are, if it's the first time that you've played, you know, how are you going to play? Are you going to have a contingency in place? Who are you going to talk to? You know, the same way that we might set up a safe call with somebody. You know, I'm going to arrange, you know, if I'm new to ESM and I'm going to play, and I know I'm going to play at this event on Sunday, you know, I'm going to arrange to go for coffee with someone I'm really close to, and I can tell anything to them all day. Because just little things that we can sort of pre-mortem and think, I'm going to do this, I'm going to think about it beforehand, and I'm going to take these steps. Because the reality is you might not have the picture of how this all works for you until you've been doing it for a year.
And equally, it's important to have that external connection, because when you are stuck at the bottom of that well and the whole world feels like shit and it's all against you, you can't pull yourself out of it. It's much easier to have someone, to have that coffee, to have that talk, and actually do it with another submissive or top or person interested in the same areas, because they're going to understand. And you can turn around to another sub and say, oh, fucking hell, those dominants, what a bunch of cunts, they do this to us every single time. And they're going to go, yeah. Now you try and have that conversation with the dominant, they're going to go, yeah, no, that's another mark in the little black book for next week. So it doesn't work. You need someone who is going to give that support.
I think Jerry's going to contribute something.
I was going to take you back to early on when you were saying that the drop isn't unique to the King Team.
Yeah.
Everybody drops.
Yeah.
Performers drop, athletes drop. I had very much, when I first came on the scene, I had munch drop. I went to a munch and then suddenly I wasn't kicking people in. I had land drop. A fantastic day where all these amazing people, and then what do I do now? And I would take you, those of you who came to the induction session, talk to each other, get each other's pet life names. You don't have to be a real man. If you feel drop in 2 or 3 days' time, you really had a great day there, I miss it, talk to someone else. Wasn't it fantastic when, for the first time in my life, I was able to be me, and not hide anything, and express who I wanted to be, among all these other kinky people, and now it's gone. What do I do?
Absolutely, coming to an event like this is massive. You know, coming to your first event, and I still remember mine. It was many years ago. It was called Lash. You know, and I still remember. Literally could not hear. I was there with a dominant partner, and he was whispering something in my ear. You know, to try and. I to this day couldn't tell you what he was saying. All I could hear was my heart literally ringing through my body. Oh my God! I think I was 19 in a course that I bought on the internet, walking into this event, thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen here? You know, and I recall that so vividly. And ultimately, for a lot of people, this will be your first event, and that experience will be different. You know, this is a different introduction, I suppose. But it's a big deal. You know, it is a big deal to find your tribe, find your people. That's what I was saying earlier on about. That's really, really important, that connection, that intimacy. So, you know, if this is something that, you know, in a few days' time, you're going to think, oh my God, you know, I did it, I went there, am I okay with this? You know, I'm giving somebody, you know, we make mistakes when we're at events like this, and things that we interpret as mistakes. I remember quite early on saying to somebody, you know, what my name was, and I had somebody in my life who was saying, well, we mustn't give our real name. I'm going back a number of years, a little bit more, I don't know, pre-50 Shades of Grey, and we were very, very,
when
very...
the newspapers were still turning up and taking naughty pics.
Exactly, you know, it was very, very in a way that it's different now. You know, it was very simpler. Everything was compartmentalised. And I remember saying, oh, I'm at this university, this is my name. And I went away, and you know what? I dwelled on that for ages. Oh, God, what's going to happen? Is this? It felt really catastrophic, catastrophized it. And thankfully, I had somebody to talk about it. I know the person that you're quite close to and quite attached to thinks this is a big deal, but you know, I think it will probably be all right. And it was all right, but I didn't do that again for a long time. So it's about having confidence and having people that you can talk to. If that's just somebody on FetLife, great. If that's someone that you formed a connection with and you met today, brilliant. If that's someone you tended with, fab. If there's somebody that's been that I've known half a lifetime, you know, if I've had a problem, go to them in a little heartbeat. You know, those connections are really, really important. And I feel like we've deviated a little bit from drop, but what happens in these workshops is ultimately what it comes down to a lot of the time is the answer to the original question is always about really, really good communication, either prior to something occurring, the pre-mortem, or post it occurring, the post-mortem, and the amount of issues that can solve itself is, you know.
We also have a Telegram group chat called LAMchat. Now, we started this during lockdown thinking, God, kinky people need to keep in touch with each other. We've actually found its greatest use is post-event because as well as drop, we sometimes get people who go away on a buzz. Now, you might not think, wow, you come out here, it was amazing, I've had an awesome time. If that energy and that feeling doesn't dissipate over 3 or 4 hours, by the time it gets to 36, 48 and pushing on 72, you get quite tired. So it's good to be able to say, oh my God, I'm buzzing, I can't sleep, this is going on, and we're going to go, yeah, that does happen, relax, chill, phase it down a bit, think about maybe next time not coming for the full 12 hours and doing 3 or 4, taking a break and coming back into it. Because drop is one aspect, the other end is the frenzy that can ensue.
And one thing I will say about drop as well, that, you know, lots of these workshops and lots of things that you see written, talked about in these spaces can get a little bit repetitive. We talked about that earlier. But one of the things that I was thinking about earlier is in terms of what isn't discussed a lot. I was looking at this earlier on in the week. It's about basically how our emotions affect our cognitions. And I won't go into it in any great depth, but basically how we feel ultimately, because a complicated series of events ends up impacting how we behave. And this is something that I look at DBT, which is dialectical behavioural therapy, and we talk about people, how they're driven by their emotions all of the time. And what we fail to acknowledge is how that ultimately then can impact on our behaviour. So what I will say is, if you are suffering from drop, if you are in a place where you've had a heavy scene, or you've had a real attachment, connection with somebody, and you are struggling, about what you do, you know, the commitments that you make, what you agree to, because if you are in that place where you're on a high with somebody, you know, you're extremely submissive, but believe it or not, you are extremely vulnerable in that place as well, because everything's great, you'll do anything for anybody, and you have to come down a little bit. You know, I talk about in my line about finding your wise mind, and some people really struggle to find that when they are, you know, grieving, or when they've had an argument with somebody. You know, how many people here have had an argument with somebody and that's it, the relationship's over, I'm moving out, and this, and that, and moving. But ultimately, what we fail to see as well is when we are on a high, we've just played, or we've got drop, or we've been vulnerable, or we've been involved in an intense emotional experience of connection with somebody, how that impacts on how we can behave. So it's about riding that process out and getting back to what's normal and regulated for us before we say, oh yeah, that was really amazing, I really loved doing wax play with you, I want to have a 50-person gangbang next Friday. You know, because that's, you know, do you really want a 50-person gangbang next Friday? You know, it's a bit extreme for wax. You might do. Come back to me and let's have this conversation on Friday if you still want that. But, you know, think about it. And I think that's one thing that we don't necessarily equate together as much as we should. How we feel versus what we think and how we act. And we need to make sure that we're checking that with ourselves, with our friends over coffee. And that's a big part of drop. And that impacts some people more than others. Some people, when they've just had an intense evening, an intense connection with somebody, a partner, particularly submissive dominant, you know, they literally will, you know, sell their kidney for their 3 days later. Do you really want to sell your kidney? So just be aware of it. You know, has anybody got any other question? Anything else that I'd like to ask?
Yes, so what I'm finding is that it kind of like links. I've been around poly and A&M before, and I'm finding the relationships between play partners. It's like kind of following a similar dynamic. But one thing I'm kind of struggling with myself at the moment is me and my metamorph, I believe the term, are like both wanting the same thing from the same person, and impact play particularly. And it's that kind of, if they book that time in, then there's the recovery aspect, and it's like, it's quite, I'm finding it quite a challenge.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm having to like schedule on a calendar, and it's kind of taking away a bit of the thrill of it almost. I'm saying, is that quite a regular thing that seems to be happening in the scene?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
Google Docs is your best
No,
friend.
seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously. It's ridiculously my life's plan.
the real reality of it is it's not the sexiest answer to the question, but the real reality is a lot of what we do is inherently not sexy. You know, the pre-mortem, the post-mortem, the conversations, the workshops like this, they're not the sexy end of it. And to do things effectively and to do things ethically, quite often there's a lot of scheduling, there's a lot of logistics, there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of practicalities, there's a lot of financial expenditure quite often. You know, there's stuff that we don't really consider. And you talk about polyamory and how many partners perhaps that we have. And it does boil down to resources. You know, we might have enough emotion for, you know, like I was saying earlier on, if I play with somebody, my life's pretty fucking fun. It really is. You know, I don't have enough resources left over. So, you know, I know we don't really want to think about this. It's not the exciting bit. And you said, you know, it takes the spontaneity out. It takes the sexy. You know, it's not sexy. But, you know, if you are agreeable to being in a relationship with somebody, they're in several different relationships, you know, that's part of it. And that is the realistic answer to it. But how do you compromise? How do you get what you want? How do you, and this boils down to communication skills. Now, for anybody who's involved in poly, I always recommend Radar. So Radar's a really interesting communication tool. It's a little bit like, for people who aren't aware of what it is, it's a little bit like supervision or an appraisal at work for a relationship. And it's very structured like that. It has an agenda, it has the fact that people reconnect at the end of it. It's a very structured way of having communication. And I think if I was in your situation, I was practicing ethical non-monogamy with somebody, and you know, I was in this scenario, I would say, is it appropriate for us, the person you're in a relationship with, to have a conversation about this? Do you know what? Can we invite the other person along? Can we go and have this conversation in Starbucks? Can we do it over Zoom, on Teams, or whatever? Can we talk about what this might look like? And it might be that there's an agreement that, you know, do you know what? In February, you're away for 2 or 3 weeks, so you're doing this here, you're doing that there. You know, I want an agreement that you do other stuff, you know, loads of sex, to wax, whatever, but for this month, we're not going to do any play, for example, because I want the opportunity to take this person away, you know, lock them in a dungeon, and be really fucking spontaneous. You know, I want to, but it's about who do you have to communicate with to get what it is you want. And when we're in a monogamous relationship, that communication, not always, but is more straightforward. Once you obviously extend that out to get what you want in that situation, which is, you know, free access to this arse, you're going to have to widen that communication out, aren't you? You're going to have to, you know, invite more people in to have that talk. And what does that look like? Because people want very different things from metamors. Some people want to be able to be civil in the space with them. Some people want a friendship. Some people want to be able to go for coffee. Some people want everybody be in a party and enjoy that space. What we want isn't necessarily the same. So even that, what is the metamor's expectations of those relationships with one another is a really early conversation. I had some couples counselling this week, and what it all boiled down to at the end of it was one person wanted to be able to meet who their partner was going to play with, sexually be intimate with, in an environment that was, you know, quiet, it wasn't a party, it was one-on-one, it was a meal, it was I want that introduction, I want to feel that you are safe and that this is okay, and that one of my core values is to protect you and look after you and nurture you. I want to make sure that this is okay, and then I will give you the green light. And that hadn't really been communicated, what was driving this to the other party, and the other party felt like this was controlling behaviour, it was coercive, it was invasive, it was, and in actual fact, a conversation in terms of what everybody's motives were was enough to sort of help them out.
One thing I would say, in that kind of situation, there is a tendency for people to think about it as a competitive thing. What do I have to do to get more of this that I want? And the answer is incredibly simple. Ask the other person what you can do to them or do for them to make that feasible. Because psychologically, from a dominance perspective, the number of people asking you for something is never going to be a short list. But actually, people coming up and saying, hey, can I do anything for you? Not necessarily with, if I do something for you, will you do this for me? But it's that offer of service. You'll get to the top of my queue by doing it, because it's the rare way of behaving, because everyone's like, ooh, you can do this to me. Yeah, I can do that to you, but do I want to do it? So spin it round a little bit. Don't think of it as a competition between you and the others. Set yourself apart by offering what you can do to
Well,
this
kind of
building.
like that, that's why I asked, because it's like the opposite of that almost. And I'm the one who's like very open, like like obviously they already had an established dynamic and used the dynamic, and it's that balance between not impacting upon their time and their play,
Yeah.
validating their relationship,
Of course.
but also it's meant to be part of our dynamic and our relationship, and then it's that person I think is struggling, the better more struggling with that as like a cisgendered white male, and then another cisgendered white male appears. That kind of threat level rises.
And the answer is, it needs to be either something that you avoid conflict engagement and find what works for the common factor. Because it might be, as Poppy said, that their fear is that another person coming in who they perceive as doing the same as them means that they will be replaced.
And I
When
think
in fact,
hierarchy as well, to what you're saying is really important. We use hierarchy like a sort of a dirty word. The reality is there's going to be real challenges if you have poly relationships where there are two dominant partners, or where there are two tops, or where there are two, who am I your submissive, your slave, I'm your princess, but I'm your, So sometimes to name the expectation can be important. And don't be frightened. I think hierarchical DS isn't popular at the moment. BDSM goes through trends. There's things that are really fashionable and things that aren't fashionable, and that changes the cycles. And at the moment, hierarchy isn't particularly fashionable, and I get that. For a lot of people, they're not comfortable, and that's fine. But in some situations, it can make things look easy. So in terms of, well, is this a primary relationship? And is, am I your dominant, but this is your, name what your expectation is. And also what you're saying as well there, in terms of, you use the example, you asked the question about impact play, and someone else is doing impact play with them, so that they need time to recover. Where does that leave me? And I'm not saying you should do it from the impact. It might be your thing, it might be your fetish. In which case, what I'm about to say is made a little bit irrelevant. But what are you trying to get from that interaction? Is it really that you've got a brand new cane that you've got and you really want to play with that? Or is there something you're trying to create? Is it about, the vulnerability? Is it punishment? Is it this, is it that? Is there a way that one of you can go about it that is different? So both have to be impacted. Can you get the same psychological fix in terms of what's going to make, somebody wet, somebody hard, somebody turn on? Is there a way around that? Does it really depend on the thing? That's what I'm saying. Is there a way? And sometimes you can circumvent, sometimes you can't. But if you don't have any idea of what underpins the desire, then it's going to be difficult. For me, looking at this psychologically, if we're talking about impact play, perhaps the desired impact could be got from something that isn't flauses and gains. Can we do some different kind of culture? Can we do something? And it's about having those conversations.
Yeah.
Don't be frightened to name where everybody sits in a relationship. I think I had another question as well. Does that answer what you
quickly answer it very quickly.
Yeah.
So with the radar system, one of the good things to get out of it is you can be like having a date. You schedule a time and a place to talk about this stuff. So what that does is it helps you both emotionally prepare. You may have difficult conversations. So what I got from the way you're sharing is that you find it difficult to kind of at least communicate about it, and there's some challenges around it. And basically, the good thing with the radar system is that you at least know then, okay, where we're going to be at, we're ready this time, place, we're going to talk about these topics, and it just allows that sort of safety to be in, to allow to have potentially heavy or difficult conversations, to then create boundaries and communication frequencies as well.
Yeah, it's perfect, and that's what you have an agenda, so there's no surprises. Everybody's aware of the agenda beforehand, so we know what this is what's going to be. So people can go in there hopefully with a clear idea, because we talk about, in the psychological time we talk about, sort of drive, threat, and soothe. And I think for some people, they automatically feel very threatened pushed into a place of, I'm not okay, when something challenges them that they weren't anticipating. Whereas if they're aware of what's coming and they're involved in that process, the conversation that flows following that is ordinarily a lot higher quality. So I think it has, if you're not aware of it, I'll do look up because it has, I reconnect on at the end, it has lots and lots of things. I'm going to come here and I'm going to go there if that's okay.
What's the follow-on question?
Oh, sorry.
You say there's radar communication structure. Is there somewhere I can read about that? I've never heard about it before.
Absolutely. So radar was invented within the poly community, so it tends to be poly websites and resources that cite it more. There's lots to talk about on FetLine. If you put radar, so it's spelled R-A-D-A-R, into Google, followed by polyamory, you'll come up with loads of resources. So it's just picking the one. It's basically, it's a tool. Of course it is. It's like a worksheet, so you'll see lots of different formats for it, and you find one that works for you. It's really readily available.
The multi-amory podcast as well. Just talking about it. There's an episode on multi-amory. It's a podcast on this website, so you can get some people that use this to talk about it.
And equally, these schemes are a little bit like football clubs. So you can be an avid supporter of one, neutral about others, and have distaste for others. So you find what works for you. Okay, because quite frankly, if you've got someone who's on one particular flavour or programme and yours is different, then again, just like the needs of aftercare, the play styles and all the rest, it just might not match on that level. So be open to that. And there are some people out there like, oh my God, unless you are a black belt radar user of the 7th Dan, then we can't have a relationship. And that's cool.
And feel free to write your own. Again, I did some work this week with a couple, I think it's more than a couple actually, but I was trying to use some traditional sort of relationship work with them, and they came to, we've had a really, really good conversation this week. We get on really well, it's been great, and we've done this thing. I'm like, okay, you've done this, what have you done? Well, we sat down and we've talked about what our goals are, what our fears are, and what agreements that we've got. And they literally came up with their own worksheet in terms of how to manage the conflicts and the difficulties they were having. And he said, I didn't do that thing that you said. Thank you for emailing it, our relationship workbook, but we didn't use that, we used this. I said, okay, brilliant. That's really good actually. I really like that. I'm going to mention that in all these new things. They're really good. So find what works for you. There's not one size fits all. Come up with your own, reinvent the wheel, that's absolutely fine. Whatever gets that good quality communication and the outcome that you want from it, that's success.
One of the things I will chip in on that and say, in general, anyone who approaches kink with a philosophy of there being one true way missed the fucking point. Because quite frankly, you're all individuals, and if there was one magic solution that worked for absolutely everyone, then Christ, you'd be able to get some kind of dating coach app or some workshop that you could go on, and you know what? 3 hours later, you have an NVQ in kink. You can spend an entire fucking lifetime attempting to learn as much of this as you can, and you're still not going to scratch the surface because you're walking to a club and someone will pull something out of their bag that you've never seen before, and they'll use it in a way that you've never seen before, and you'll just sit there and think, oh, all the hours I've put into this, I never thought of this at all.
And although there's certainly not one true way when it comes to kink and play, talking about play there, I think there are some absolute gold standards though when it comes to communication and it comes to interactions and all of this, what I talk about in this workshop as well. And if anyone hasn't read it, what I've not been on FetLine a lot recently. I've had a recent bereavement and I lost my sister, so I've been away a little bit. But I revisited it this week because I knew I was coming here. And one of the things that I read was, I read the kitchen's work, which a lot of you do, and she wrote a piece. If you've not read it, it's one of my favourite pieces that she's written, and it's about consistency and how important consistency is in terms of, if we're going to have an orgasm, right or wrongly, we need consistency. It's really one of the fundamental things that gets us to come. But in terms of a relationship, how important consistency is. In terms of communication, how important consistency is. So although there's not one size that fits all in terms of kink and sexuality, there are some really fundamental, key cornerstones of how we should be interacting with each other, And if you are new, and I know a lot of this room is, and this is why I raise it here, make yourself aware of them, in terms of, when we're looking at the radar and really good fundamental ways of having a conversation about pre-mortem disease, about post-mortem disease, about how we're looking at how we manage our, take accountability for our own drop, diarising things, keeping records, how we go about communicating, making sure that we've got somebody who's aware of where we are. These things we should be doing them. We should, they're really, really important. So I think, one size doesn't fit all, but make sure that you've got the foundations and the fundamental things right as well as
feels a bit redundant now.
No, not necessarily.
Obviously, communication being key.
Yeah.
Are there any resources or advice that you would give somebody? I think kink and also like polyamory and being, a lot of communication necessary. Are there any other resources or advice that you've given? Obviously,
Yeah, I mean, that's a really difficult question, actually. It's more difficult than you would think because we are so individual. From what one, you mentioned the podcast there, and I mentioned the podcast quite recently. So I really, really rate this podcast. Go and have a look at it. They came back to that. I didn't like that. I didn't agree with that. I thought that was actually terrible. I really like a lot of the old school books and literature. So I read a lot of Wiseman and a lot of, when I came into the scene, there was literally a website. We've got a bookseller out there, Zach. There was a website of books to read, and there were. But if you want to do impact, maybe you want to do road read, or you want to do this, you read this. And they were very much the key literature. And nowadays, a lot of what's professed in that is out of fashion, isn't it? It's not popular. It's, you can't say that. So
Oh God. Screw the roses. If you flick through it, it's like the original version of the Lover's Guide. I mean, just the pictures and everything are so out of date.
Yeah. So, for me, it very much depends on who's asking that question. And it is about, doing your homework.
Yeah.
I know it's about, FetLife is a brilliant place to start, but it's certainly not the only place to start. There are loads of podcasts. I would always, yeah, it is for the housing. Like any other trade, you want to perfect your craft.
Yeah.
In the early days, you do need to research. I always recommend Cognitions. She talks about her friends, but we're also a great deal of respect for one another.
Yeah.
And how many apps does she produce? It's several a week. A lot of them, I'll be honest, it's just her everyday experience of what's going on, and they're not, you have to learn a great deal about yourself or anything from them. But some of them are absolutely going nuts. So it's about learning when you find a writer who you admire, be it her, be it somebody else, that you know how to write. I'm going to look at that person, I'm going to search drop in the King Shrinks writer and something good. Or I really respect this person, they're in a poly household. I'm going to search jealousy, things that they've written. How do you know how to do that? People say, oh, you can search for that. I'm like, yeah, you can. So it's about, where can you find that information that makes something? I can't give you a list of, who I think people should read and should aspire to. But ultimately, once you do know who you like, when you read things and something resonates, what are you going to do with that? How do you search? How do you share? How do you, there's some things that I like. I still do like high rock. Yes, I talk about that always with a disclaimer now because I know it's going to get a really strong reaction.
I like Jordan Peterson, but I know it's going to get me stoned.
Never stop learning. Things change all the time. If you talk to someone and they profess to know everything about polyamory, they profess to know everything about media play, we don't. Even now, you're talking to somebody and there's a bit of research that has come out that will change the way that I play in terms of in a medical talk because of the COVID pandemic. We know something we need to do here. And that's the reality of it. So you will never, ever stop learning. But I think in the early days, it is about, immersing yourself in that as much as you realistically can. You've all got jobs and commitments and lives, but about doing it. And coming to spaces like this and asking questions and sharing knowledge, it's a great place to start. Yeah, exactly. and also, though, I think it's about those key skills in terms of, being able to weigh up the credibility of things. Because, how much information now, and this isn't just about BDSM fetish, is it? We talk about fake news all the time. We talk about things that are put out there on various different social media platforms. When I came into the scene, there was informed consent. And there was maybe, colony.
The LFS, it was colony, LFS, and informed consent.
There was like a few, and this is the world. The world is shown. There's social media platforms that I am not even aware of. You know, obviously I'm aware of TikTok and things like that on it. But there's like every single time I talk to somebody who's 10 years younger than me, they're telling me about a new platform that they're on that I've never heard of. You know, and apparently there was something going on about strangulation on TikTok recently, and it was fashionable. And I'm like, whoa, oh my god. So in terms of where do we get information from, I think ultimately we are bombarded with information all the time. I think one of the most pertinent parts of that is how do we filter that? How do we look at things that we give credibility to, and how do we look at, one of the world leaders and should be one of the most influential people on the planet telling us that maybe we need to inject bleach. I think the whole world collectively, I'm joking, the whole world collectively sat and drew breath when we watched that, didn't we? It was like, he said what? He said that? He's been allowed this platform to say that?
5% of them rushed for a fucking syringe.
But around the world, we watched, I don't know if you saw the Netflix documentaries, but it's a roundup of 2020 and a roundup of 2021, and they've done a show, it's a comedy show, and I watched the one that had them on, and the whole world did that. And you see that on FetLife. You see somebody who's quite credible and quite well known, and FetLife will post something and we're all a bit like, whoa. So it's about how do you validate the information that we are all bombarded with.
And it's very healthy to have due diligence skills and a good dose of cognitive dissonance. Because quite frankly, I'll say, because I don't think many people use it, fetish.com, the relatively new one.
Yeah.
Awesome marketing department. All of their literature looks fucking stunning. It's really well presented, it's formatted, it's got all the scrolls, it's color coordinated, and the bullet points are shit. and it's one of those. It's fur coat, no knickers. It looks brilliant, but actually when you start reading down, you kind of think, oh, I'd have probably put the last point first because that's the most important one, and then I'd have gone through the safety stuff. But it's one of those. So be sensible, and there's a reason why when we do technical workshops, I will have 5 or 6 people over a 5-year period doing spanking. Because while 80% of it is common, the 20% of gems and nuggets that you'll pick up from the difference between the two is what it's all about. So do your research, but try not to get too stuck in a rut with one person's philosophy. Take as much on board, and as
And it's supposed to be fun, ultimately, we learn by doing, don't we? And you can have an idea about, well, this is how such a book says we should do X, but, you've got to do it, you've got to experience, you've got to have fun, you've got to be not afraid to make mistakes, and that's what I say about the underpinnings of communication. If you've built a really solid relationship with somebody where there's trust built, it doesn't matter if there's a mistake. I remember, going way back to city, but playing handcuffs and the key got lost, and really trivial, ridiculous stuff. And anything you would read about, steel bondage would say, make sure you've got a spare key, make sure you've got this, make sure very basic silly mistakes. But the fact that mistake was made, how it was dealt with, the fact that we used humour, we laughed about it, it was resolved, that had brought us closer together. So, we don't have to get everything right. Let's not, the perfect is the enemy of the good. And I think when you start out in anything, be it kink, be it fetish, be it, new employment, is this good enough? If you both had a good time, or we're both, we're not necessarily all on the same page, things aren't perfect in our relationship, but we're all talking, that's good enough. What standard are we holding ourselves to?
This will be the first time this has been confirmed in public, but despite the fact that I probably don't have enough free time already, I've decided to launch another new project, which is going to be called DungeonDisasters.com. And it's a podcast of 3 questions. Who are you? What disasters have you learnt about in the dungeon? And tell us about what you'd like people to be aware of. And that's it. 3 questions. And I want to ask as many people as possible, and ideally get them up to a stage where they're coming out about once a fortnight, because everyone has an amusing story. The lost key, the butt plug that ended up going a little bit too far, the whisk. Yeah. So we've all got these giggly stories that it's almost like a bit of an in thing, because you only need to mention whisk, and that's it. Several people who've heard it will giggle. People who really have heard it will cross their legs. And it's one of those. But that will be a legendary story that I hope people will be telling in 25
For
years'
people
time.
who aren't aware as well, because I hate when things like this turn a little bit, some people don't talk about it, some don't. So the king shrink had a sexual experience when she was blindfolded that she talks about really openly, and it's now urban legend. When she went to a hotel room, someone served a whiskey at her and it whipped her fully out. And see, so we're all different things. So she talks, women, everybody horrendous. So she talks about this. This is her experience of something where, when we're talking about what goes on the list of things that you're not going to do, we talk about, I'm not interested in that. How many of us would think to put whisks on there? Of course we would. We're not all going to blindfold us and stick a whisk inside of ourselves. So it's about, but it's interesting because even now, it's only literally 3 or 4 days ago, I was in Dunelm doing some shopping, trying to buy a mirror, and there was a piece of art there that said, "Don't be frightened to take whisks." And it was obviously your kitchen. Wrong with them. We do coffee, live life more with coffee. And it was in the kitchen department, and I took a picture of it and sent it to her, and she went, it's a running joke. So, we've all got those stories.
That's only because I found a collapsible balloon whisk that folds out on itself that can't actually do that interlocking thing. And now I've gone, I have a safe balloon whisk for my kit bag.
And what I say all of the time in my work is not just fetish, as people say, but ultimately the world now has access to so much information. That's what you're asking. So much social media. We are so intrusive in a way that we have never been into each other's lives. And that includes their sex lives and their kid lives and their relationships. And the reality is we only ever get somebody's show reel. We never get the behind the scenes. We never know what's going on. I love the idea of this website that Cosmo's talking about, because that's a look at when it's going on. It's the bloopers, isn't it? And some people are really open about putting out there, in the same way that I share denser stories. They will talk about what's not going on. But a lot of that culture has shifted, that we want everybody to see this perfect, Insta-ready show reel of our lives. And that's not real. It's not real on Facebook, it's not real on whatever platform, and it's not real on Facebook. So if I can say anything to anybody, it is about, I think it's really important to be authentic people in the world, and to keep things real. If things do go wrong, it's important to share and laugh about that, as it is to when you have exactly the perfect.
It's a small trip from the perfect Instagram profile to the ABC articles in Australia at the moment about the guy that's still inside because he was accused of human trafficking. And it's one of those. If you looked at their shots from, let's say, 2016, you'd think that it was a 7-person poly household, that everyone was idyllic and thoroughly enjoying it. Now, several years later, it's coming out that some of the people didn't consent to working as sex workers and giving the money to their dominant, etc. And it's caused a little bit of a scandal in Australia. It's one of those. If it looks that good in the perfect
It's too good to be true quite often, and that's
when you see this beautiful woman suspended from this fantastic tree in this weird position, just imagine what's just slightly out of shot. 20 blokes waiting to catch her.
What are you not seeing? And there's a lot of things on actually, Deb's on talking about this week. There's a lot of images on FET at the moment that are just not possible. There's waterbombed pictures that, there are scuba people in there with oxygen tanks to create that image, to create that picture. And it's really important that we remember that, because we have more of this now, like say, across the board, but it is infiltrated kink in a way that if you think everything that you see is possible and attainable and realistic, it's not.
And I saw it on Instagram is not a valid reason for justification for your recent fuck up. And honest to God, I hear it all the time. Oh, but I saw someone do that on Insta. And I'm like, you saw a picture of what you thought that they did. But as Jerry said, it's the 7 or 8 big burly blokes standing off the shop who, up until 3 seconds before, were supporting the person's entire weight, because you can't suspend someone from their big fucking toe. You can create the illusion for about 5 seconds because everyone steps back, lets the person control their head so they're smiling for the first 6 seconds, and then the excruciating pain kicks in, and the big burly blokes come and pick them up again. But they haven't done that honestly and said, this is what went into all of that exercise. It's just, there's my perfect Instagram picture. Go on, put some hearts and love tags on it.
And well, and honestly, we are all here to, we are all here to try and find out people. Now, I had a heartwarming that was soon to Cosmic earlier on. I had a heartwarming moment this week because I've got a godchild. And he's just got to the stage now where he's getting his independence and obviously very much away from an environment like this, but he's found his people. He's into Yu-Gi-Oh! And he's gone independently and he's had a great time. And this was days ago and he's still on that high, and he's far younger than we are, because he's found his people. And the importance of that is absolutely not to be underestimated. So this is your first event, and you have found your people, you've found your tribes you're interested in. It's filling in some of those jigsaw puzzle spaces in terms of who I am, what's my identity, what do I want, what drives me in life, how do I want my life and relationships to look like. Welcome, to everybody, and thank you for joining me here. What I will say as well, I always practice what I preach, about boundaries and about communication. I am around for the next 2 hours. If anybody wants to approach me, to ask me any questions, if you want to talk about anything, I've already had a couple of people said they want to have a conversation. So please grab me in the next 2 hours. After that time, I am going to be ordering from the cocktail menu, and you will only get my opinion and nothing resembling my professional opinion. So grab me sooner rather than later if anybody's got anything that they want to ask. And I absolutely consider it my privilege to be invited to talk to you today. Thank you for coming.